Welcome back, Superboy Beyond fans. Tom and I are here today with a brand new feature, which was actually suggested by one of our viewers. It was Fish, right?
It was, yes.
Okay.
Fish always leaves us with comments with suggestions for stuff, and
Yep. Fish suggested that we take a couple of season 1 episodes and do a rewrite on them because they definitely could use them. And this is going to be part 1 of a 2-parter. We're going to start with the episode that Tom chose. So take it away, Tom.
Yeah. So yeah, basically his comment was, if you could rewrite and if you could direct yourself, like what episode from season 1 would you remake? And this is an episode that I do quite like, although it is far from perfect. But obviously, you know from the title of this video, it is Phantom of the Third Division. And I've expanded it out into a 2-parter, so there's a lot of new scenes. I haven't bothered just rewriting stuff that was already in the episode. There's a couple of little things here and there that I make mention are still going on. But you can basically just assume that almost everything that happened in the original version happens in this. It's just that it's restructured and it's expanded on a little bit. So yeah, I'll just get into this. It won't be like season 5 where I make a bunch of fake screenshots from it. I'll probably just have the main poster image that's also the thumbnail for this YouTube video, just because yeah, making a whole bunch of fake screenshots would be really difficult with this episode in particular. But yeah, I'll get straight into it. First off, I'll just say this is one of the few episodes of Superboy that has a pre-title sequence. But I figure season 1, if you're going to do it in any season, season 1's the one to do it in, since they already had 2 at least. I can't remember if they had 3. I could only remember 2. But yeah, it's 3 now. And the episode is a 2-parter, as I say. But yeah, it opens in an army barracks. Superimposed text on screen reads Korea 1951. And you see it opens with 2 men. They're sitting in the army barracks, and they're played by Ian Buchanan and Dylan McDermott. And I've got pictures on screen now, and hopefully the people watching can sort of see why I've cast them in particular, because they do look vaguely like the original actors. But yeah, they're sitting in the barracks, they're playing poker, they're smoking cigarettes, and basically the smoke seems to have filled the room somewhat unrealistically, you could argue. But since I'm directing, I want to have a subtle mist effect in basically every scene that's set in the past. They're at war, there's smoke around, plus those scenes will be in black and white. So it will help us hide the lack of budget a little bit there. Basically every scene during the war will have that, but it also, you know, it will make it more obvious to the audience when scenes are set in the past, even though the cast will make it obvious enough. But anyway, you get the idea. Anyway, they're in there, they're playing poker, and they're disturbed by an officer of a higher rank who he says in a stern voice, "All right, Kent, LaRue, get your gear, you're heading out as soon as your escort arrives." And I should say that I renamed the character of the Phantom to LaRue, because LaRue was the surname of the creator of Phantom of the Opera. So I just stole his surname for the character, because on IMDb he's only ever known as the Phantom. So I gave him an actual name, since we're expanding on him a little bit. Yeah. Anyway, he says, like, Kent, LaRue, as the camera cuts their faces to make it obvious who is who. And he just says, "Get your gear, you're heading out as soon as your escort arrives." And as he leaves, the men turn to each other. LaRue smacks Kent on the shoulder and says, "Finally some action. You hear that, Johnny boy?" Making it obvious that it's Jonathan Kent. Jonathan Kent just looks serious, says, "Right," turns around, goes to grab his gear, and as soon as his back is turned and his friend can't see his face, you can see his face just drop. You know, he's not serious. He's frigging terrified, as you would be, you know. But yeah, while his back is turned and you see him looking scared, like the sounds of gunfire and explosions will fade in probably a few seconds before we actually cut to the battlefield. And we just see them running from gunfire. There's explosions going on, there's gunfire, and basically you can see Jonathan. He's essentially just trying to survive the onslaught. He's not really interested in fighting at this moment. He's, it's clear that he's severely outnumbered and outgunned in this situation. It's literally him and LaRue versus countless enemy who you can't really see. They're running from the onslaught. Jonathan looks worried, but LaRue is slightly different. He's absolutely loving it. He's laughing. At one point, he turns and starts running backwards, firing behind to where the enemy are. He's loving it. Basically, if you've ever seen the show Firefly, just imagine Nathan Fillion during the opening of that, when they're it's the scene during the war, and he's like laughing, going like Yahoo, and he's like firing guns, laughing. It's that sort of thing. He's not as worried as he probably should be.
Right.
Showing that maybe he was always a little bit mentally unstable. Really.
Yeah.
Considering where we know this story's going, I thought, I'll set it up a little bit early with that. But LaRue's loving it. You see, while he's running backwards, he actually does manage to take one or two of them down, but then suddenly just everything goes silent. And he realizes that not only are the enemy not shooting at him anymore, but it's quiet, almost like the enemy's just waiting to see what happens. And he literally he shoots a few more times, and then he hears laughing. And obviously that confuses him. He turns on the spot and shouts back at Jonathan, like, what the hell are they laughing at? Jonathan stops and turns around, dropping to the ground so not to be shot if any more bullets start flying. And as Jonathan's looking, he sees about 3 feet to his right a landmine. And he immediately shouts, don't move. LaRue turns and takes just one step forward, seemingly slightly confused. He obviously didn't listen to the instruction, don't move. But yeah, that one step was enough. He's now standing on a mine. It's one of those pressure sensitive ones, and if he takes his foot off, it blows. The two friends lock eyes, and title sequence. Quite a long pre-title sequence, but I think it sets up the story a little bit. The episode continues more or less as it originally was, maybe a little bit grittier, slightly scarier. Obviously, when LaRue shows up in Smallville with the face mask, maybe I'll set some of those scenes a little later in the evening, so it's slightly darker, so it's not just daylight all the time, to try and match the mood of the scene.
Right.
The Smallville scenes and modern day scenes, basically the same. Jonathan getting lured to the hospital and getting abducted will basically be the cliffhanger for the end of part 1 when we get to that point. But both episodes are basically intercut with the original story and these flashbacks, and we actually see back in the war, as we cut back to the minefield, we see Jonathan have an idea, and he pulls off, like, he's wearing this big backpack thing, and he pulls it off, and you see him opening it, and it's like there's tinned food in there, there's other items of clothing, there's kit and stuff, and you see him like take note of what's in there, and LaRue figures out what Jonathan is doing, maybe slightly before the audience does. But obviously these guys are friends. I'm playing into the fact that they sort of know how each other thinks a little bit. The enemy is still watching at this point as Jonathan's doing this, and we can just hear some sort of confused mutters, and then laughter starts up again once the enemy works out what Jonathan's about to do. But Jonathan takes a deep breath and turns, checks the ground between him and LaRue for mines, starts walking away. And LaRue is like, just leave me. It's not worth it. It's not worth it. And he just says, don't you dare take your foot off that mine. And he turns back around and just basically runs at him with his backpack out front and sort of does a jumping tackle like a football player, I guess, American football. And manages to get the pack between them and the landmine just before it explodes, basically saves them both. But as the episode goes on, we're going to find that they were taken to a prisoner of war camp, And yeah, while they're both there at the camp, this is obviously a lot of this part will happen after Jonathan's been abducted. There will be some scenes showing them at the camp. They're being kept far away from each other in the building. We spend time just seeing how they spent their time imprisoned during this time. They never actually get to see each other during this, but every now and then when one of them is being interrogated / tortured, they can hear each other scream from the other side of the building. So it's just creating this just really uneasy, horrible atmosphere. And
Right.
LaRue, by the way, through every scene in the camp has always had the mask over his face. The implication is that his face was hurt basically during the explosion of the mine, but we'll come back to that in a bit. But obviously they do ask about each other, but they're not being told anything. Completely kept in the dark. And as the episode continues, and as Jonathan is being forced to undergo those sort of tests, like the obstacle course and stuff like that was in the original episode, we discover through flashbacks that they were also forced to undergo tests during the war, and that it wasn't a normal prisoner of war type building, like something far more sinister was going on. And yeah, their captors are basically, they're putting them through strange tests, obstacle courses, psychological tests, they're drugging them. There's a whole bunch of bizarre forms of interrogation, including one which seems far too science fiction for the Korean War. But there is a point for that. LaRue will finally reveal at the end that Jonathan basically managed to break them both out, and we actually see them escape the prison. It'll be just this whole fun action sequence as he's shooting the bad guys trying to get out. But LaRue will say that there was only one problem with that. It's just they weren't Koreans they killed that day. They were something else entirely. And then we see in a few flashes in Jonathan's memory, every now and then, as a soldier gets shot, just for a second, it flashes and you see that they're basically alien imposters. And
Okay.
in terms of design, they won't be able to acknowledge that this is who they are, but it's the White Martians.
Okay.
So yeah, can't be named for obvious reasons, but who cares? Anyway, LaRue's face at this point in the present is revealed to basically have no scars, just like the original episode. Like it's all in his head, and it basically is revealed that the mask, he was basically being forced to wear the mask by the White Martians, basically from the moment he set foot into that camp. And it's just basically another level of their psychological tests that they've been running. And yeah, that explains why he thinks he's so scarred and he's not. But yeah, we'll see that he does see a massive scar every day when he looks in the mirror. Maybe there'll be a visual effects shot that looks vaguely like Two-Face from Batman, something like that, just to give the impression that that is what he sees, even if it's not actually, the case. But yeah, obviously Clark has been trying to locate Jonathan for all of this. He arrives shortly after this moment. And yeah, obviously we're flashing back and forth. LaRue tells Jonathan something along the lines of, like, they tried to make us forget, and they did make us forget, or at least they made you forget. But I could still see the scar every day in the mirror. And it took years, but he finally managed to work out what was happening. He finally got those memories back. And as he's telling Jonathan this, like, Jonathan's memories are being unlocked too. And he's like, yeah, okay, maybe I would have thought you were a little bit mad, but no, I'm starting to remember that too now. And it's just like somehow before they got out, they must have been recaptured somewhere along the line and had their memories. Like maybe even the American government are the ones that wiped their memories for obvious reasons. Who knows? That's one of those questions that I'll leave up in the air, really. But Jonathan basically tells LaRue that it took years to get his head straight. They had both of them on so many drugs while they were at that place that honestly, it took him a while just to regain his sanity. It messed him up so much. And he says that the only reason he was able to do it is because he had someone to help him. And he talks about Martha and all of this. And he says, like, if I didn't have that, I could have been in the exact same situation that you are right now, just half crazed, basically, just at the end of it, you can't. Yeah, there's nothing he can really even do at that point. He's just lost his mind because of what was done. But Jonathan tells him that, he did try to find him after the war, and he can never locate him. I guess LaRue just became a drifter for several decades.
Right.
But yeah, he tells him, look, you don't have to do this alone this time. And basically he offers LaRue a job as a farmhand in Smallville and helps him work through it. And the episode literally ends with the two shaking hands, friends again after all these years, even though he's just basically tortured Jonathan for a couple of hours. But obviously Jonathan understands because now he really understands. And that's how the episode will end. Basically, though, I will just say the entire episode is restructured around all of these flashbacks. So it's not all just taking place in the war. We're constantly going back and forth. Structured, I guess, kind of like an episode of Lost where it's constant. But yeah,
but done
certain things
Lost.
are missing. No, I love Lost. It's one of my favorite shows of all time. I love Lost, even the ending. But no, there are some things from this episode that are removed. The slightly cringy scene with the biker gang at the beginning of the episode is just gone. I think part of what I would want to do with the opening of the episode would be showing that Smallville is a really nice place to be initially. Kind of saying, like, the war is coming to this really nice place and almost corrupting it a little bit. And so it opens almost like, small town USA. It's just Norman Rockwell and all of that stuff, it's just
right.
And then the war comes to Smallville and things take a darker turn. So I think having the biker gang in Smallville at the start actually just detracts from what I'm trying to do with the episode a little bit. So they're just gone now, and it will just be a really nice scene of Lana showing TJ around a little bit. Just basically because I guess TJ's there. I could have just cut TJ from it entirely, but I like TJ. So I figure, if it was actually developed as a full script, obviously TJ would have more to do. Obviously, as it is with this idea, I'm just bouncing around the episode, telling you stuff that's going to that would have happened, and it's stuff that wouldn't. Anyway, that's basically how I would have rewritten the episode if I could have.
So
obviously, it would need more development.
What I'm picking up from the episode is you've intercut little bits of essentially the Manchurian Candidate in it.
A little bit.
Okay. And then it's also, one of the greatest Korean War films was Pork Chop Hill. You've kind of put a little bit of that in there.
I haven't seen that. What happens? What have I taken from that? Just so I know.
Well, just the camaraderie between the two men.
Oh, fair enough. Yeah.
Plus it's set during the Korean War.
Yeah. And I've probably made some mistakes in terms of setting, but I figure if it was an actual TV show, they could probably get someone in to consult on the episode and actually fix some of this stuff. I don't even know, did landmines that you have to take your foot off to actually set them off, did they even exist at that point? I don't know that they did.
I think they've existed since at least World War I or World War II. But there's a misnomer.
I know there were landmines in that war, but I didn't know if it was that type specifically.
But, there's a misnomer about landmines, though. Landmines, the traditional thing about them, when you're watching a movie or a TV show set during the war, is that you put your foot on it and then you step off and then that explodes. It's not exactly true.
It would have just exploded when he stood on it, I guess.
Yep. Landmines.
Screw it.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a white Martian landmine.
I like the idea that you're using the white Martians.
Yeah, it was just going to be an alien, but I thought, white Martians, it works well enough. originally it was not going to be aliens at all. Like my first draft of this episode, he was captured basically by Gorilla Grodd and Grodd's army. And it turns out they weren't sent to Korea at all. Like they were sent off on a separate mission. But yeah, I couldn't make that work because then every time you see the enemy from behind, it would be obvious they're enormous.
Yeah.
I figured at least white Martians can shapeshift, and that sort of makes a bit more sense as to why they're posing as humans. Sorry, go on anyway.
Yeah, and it would lead down the road, since white Martians pretty much are almost the exact same thing as green Martians. It would lead somewhere down the road to, maybe, since Jean has been on Earth for 40 years, maybe he's been watching over Jonathan to see what was going on.
Maybe. I don't.
Because
the
in the
only
comics,
reason I've not included any reference to green Martians is purely because I figure that would probably be a step too far. Whereas if they're just scary looking white aliens that are quite tall and skinny, you could easily just say they're just a take on, the classic Roswell alien / Spielberg alien,
right.
They could plead ignorance to the studio. But you're right. It's like a potential future storyline.
It was established in the comics many years ago that, after Clark landed on Earth, Jean was working on the Kent farm as a farmhand to keep an eye on him. So we could kind of use that later on, turn the dial a little bit. Instead of he's not just watching Clark, he's watching Jonathan as well.
Interesting. Yeah, like it could potentially set up a follow-up story for season 2. I realize obviously that's not what we're being asked to do today, but maybe if we do another series of these where we rewrite episodes, when we get to season 2, maybe there'll be a story somewhere there where I can basically adapt it to be a sequel to this in some way. I don't know.
Well, we should just leave it for season 5, because
true,
it's not really much need for that.
And maybe we can say that for our season 5, our rewrites of earlier seasons are canon. Although part of me thinks that I should just take the war storyline and just put it in a season 5 episode, but this will do. I don't need to do that. I can still do a follow-up in season 5 that makes reference to this. Plus it would be cool just to get
one little change that I would make to it, and it's a minor thing. The scene at the beginning when they're sitting there playing poker, maybe as Jonathan turns around and his face becomes, we'll just say, ashen, scared, maybe he just pulls out a picture of Martha just to kind of give him armor.
Yes. Yeah, and that would actually help set up the ending when he brings up Martha as the reason he was able to recover from his treatment during the war. It would help set that up, make that a little bit more powerful. So I think that's a fantastic suggestion. That definitely improves the scene.
And you've chosen Ian Buchanan as the young Jonathan.
Yeah, purely because he has massive eyebrows, just like Stuart Whitman. I do think they look slightly similar in the face. He, slightly skinnier maybe than Whitman ever was, but who cares? They're at war. Maybe they don't have a lot of food around, so maybe he's lost weight. Something like that. And what did I say? Who did I say I cast as the Phantom / LaRue? Dylan McDermott, who I mostly know from the remake of Miracle on 34th Street, which was one of my favorite Christmas films growing up. Mostly cast him purely because every time I've seen him in anything, he puts in a solid performance. But when you see him side by side with the original actor, they do look very alike.
Yes.
So
he and Joseph Campanella do have a very
they have
very
a slightly
strong facial
similarity. Yeah. So as soon as we were discussing this last week after we finished recording Superboy's Deadly Touch, and I was trying to think of someone to cast for that, and I was like, I'm sure his face, he reminds me of someone. I couldn't place it, but thankfully I did before recording. But yeah, obviously they're in the thumbnail. You've been seeing their picture throughout this. I realise this is a bit of a strangely formatted podcast episode, and I realise the story has jumped around a fair bit, but yeah, since it's a rewrite and not a full-on pitch scene by scene, I think that was okay. But yeah, that's basically it for that one. Do you want to tell the audience what next week's episode is going to be? Which episode you'll be rewriting / redirecting?
Yes. So again, we're going with some of the really bad episodes of season 1. And I know a lot of our viewers are going to say, okay, there's a lot of them. But I'm going to take one.
It is famously the weakest season. So.
Yes. I'm going to take one that had a lot of potential, but failed miserably with the execution. And that is Black Flamingo. It had a great premise, a great idea, but, I think part of the issue is the acting. And Fernando Allende, he just doesn't come across as menacing.
Yeah, he's a little bit... He's a bit skinny. He's a bit unimposing just as a look. You kind of, if you want someone playing a mob boss who's essentially hypnotizing people into committing assassinations, maybe you'd want someone slightly more intimidating. Do you know who you're going to be replacing that actor with?
Yes, it is well, I was thinking about this, but I'm not sure if he was still alive at the time, because he did die in the 90s.
I can always Google it.
That is none other than Kojak himself, Telly Savalas.
I believe he was still alive for another few years. Let me see. He died in 1994. So yeah, if it's 1988, yeah, you've got plenty of time. And who doesn't love Telly Savalas? I realise most people prefer Donald Pleasance as Blofeld in the Bond films, but I've always liked Telly Savalas in On Her Majesty's Secret Service. I just do. I think he's great as Blofeld, and I wish he'd done more. Okay, they've replaced the Bond, but I mean, let's face it, how many Blofelds were there? Could you not have kept one around?
Donald Pleasance, Telly Savalas.
The guy that was he usually plays Nazis. I think he was in Empire, not Empire. He was in Star Wars as well. I think, but he was also one of the Nazis in The Last Crusade as well. Indiana Jones, I believe. Something Glover?
No, I don't think it was Glover
or Clover.
No, the actor that you're thinking of is Glover, Julian Glover, but
maybe he just looks like him then.
He was in a Bond film, but it was in the 80s that he was a Bond film.
Right, I'm just getting confused then. It was Anthony Dawson apparently played it in From Russia with Love. Obviously, Christoph Waltz, Eric Pullman, Telly Savalas, Donald Pleasance. Charles Gray is the one that I was thinking was the guy from.
Yeah, Charles Gray was actually.
They've got a very similar look.
Yeah, he was in You Only Live Twice as a different character who gets killed, and then he came back as Blofeld.
Yeah,
and you're forgetting there's one other actor who played
Max von Sydow.
Blofeld. Yes.
Yeah, he was in Never Say Never Again, which isn't the most popular of the Bond films. It's not even official to the rest of the series, but it's worth watching just for for Sean Connery, and it's also cool seeing Rowan Atkinson in it as well.
Well, Rowan Atkinson.
It's always fun seeing Rowan Atkinson,
Yeah.
But yeah. I have seen an interview with Rowan Atkinson. Actually, he says his only regret is that he was in a Bond film and it was that Bond film. He says he loves the Bond films because he's a classic car nut. Like he's got just tons and tons of cars. Like he's always going out racing them and stuff. Yeah, he said, "Oh, I would love to do a Bond film. It's a shame I was in that one." I don't think it's the end of the world.
Maybe they'll get him to come back for something.
Who knows? I mean, let's face it. At this point, he's been playing. I think they made 3 Johnny English films, which is kind of nuts that they made 3 of those. But they're not terrible films. They're not the movies I would have chosen for Atkinson to make personally. But obviously, he gets to drive fast cars and play a spy in a comedic film for those. So I guess he got the Bond thing done in the end anyway. It's just like, they won't cast me in a better Bond film. I'll make my own. But yeah. So yeah, you're casting Telly Savalas in the role in Black Flamingo. That'll be fun. So yeah, if you want to listen to that.
Think about it. Telly Savalas, he can play both, menacing, but he can also play charming and likable, and you want the guy who's running a club where teenagers are going to be likable,
Yeah, you it's the same reason that we say, Telly Savalas would have made a great Lex Luthor. I mean, obviously he was the basis visually for Lex Luthor in this animated series, but he would have been a great Lex Luthor because he's got the charming side absolutely down. But he can also play very sinister and threatening characters as well. Like he's one of those few actors that absolutely has that skill, and he would have been an absolutely fantastic Lex Luthor. Obviously, wasn't to be, but there you go. Can't always happen. I still think it's nuts. Sorry, I just think it's crazy that he almost had a cameo in Superman the movie, but at no point was he considered for Lex Luthor. I just think that's insane.
Well, I mean, think about it. Gene Hackman was a slightly more well-known actor than Telly Savalas, even though everybody loved Telly Savalas.
But they wrote him in a cameo, basically playing himself, because everybody loved Telly Savalas at that point in time. He was so popular that they wrote him into the movie for a cameo for no good reason. So he probably would have been fine. If they cast him as Luthor, it wouldn't have mattered. They've already got Marlon Brando in the film, At least they won't have to shave Telly Savalas' head or mustache.
Yes.
Although, actually, I don't think a mustachioed Lex Luthor would have been terrible. I quite liked in recent years how a lot of Lex Luthors have had beards. They've still got the shaved head. I don't think it's that big a deal, personally. But I know some people are a little bit sticklers for that. Some people say you shouldn't have any hair at all, including eyebrows even. But I've always thought that.
You mean like John Shea did in the Return of Lex Luthor on on Lois and Clark.
Which I liked, because I liked that decision just purely because it made him look so much more sinister. And at that point, Lex's public image was shattered. So he could just be nothing but villain. And I really liked that about it. But I don't think it would work for an entire movie. I think it's one of those things that it works for a couple of episodes of television. But that's just purely because people are willing to forgive a lot more with television, Trying to sit throughout a 2-hour movie where Lex Luthor has no eyebrows would probably be pretty difficult. But yeah. So let us know in the comments. Do you think that my rewrite of Phantom of the Third Division would have been an improvement, or do you think it would have just been extending an already not very good episode? I won't hold it against you if you didn't like my episode. I'm just tried to do something kind of weird with it and go off in an original direction that Superboy never really did. But yeah. And hopefully people won't be too annoyed that I threw in an alien twist at the end.
Well, it's Superboy. You need an alien twist.
Yeah, I just, I thought, even though Superboy doesn't get to fight any aliens in it, I just thought that it was more interesting to tell in a comic book world if you include at least one fantastical element. It's a comic book world. Obviously, history is going to be very different in the DC universe. You'd even assume that there's been heroes back in the past. We've never had mention of any of the JSA, but you'd have to assume that the universe didn't become fantastical the moment Superboy arrived on Earth. It must have been kind of a strange universe before that, surely, just for Superboy to even have the potential to exist. And let's face it, how many villains and stuff were made in the show accidentally through absolutely zero involvement from Superboy himself? Like, those people would have gained superpowers probably anyway, some of them.
Yeah.
So pretty fantastical
Micro
world.
Boy.
Micro Boy, definitely. Although he was definitely inspired by Superboy, but if Superboy wasn't there, who's to say he wouldn't have been inspired by something else, or maybe just?
Well, if Superboy wasn't there, then he could have possibly maybe gotten Lana.
True. Yeah, maybe he would have had more of a shot. She did seem to kind of go for the what was it, Romeo and Juliet they were reciting at the start.
Yes.
Lana seemed to be into it. Maybe he would have had a chance. It's just, who can compare to a guy that flies around and saves the day practically every week?
Indeed.
Bit of a tough act to follow. Even Clark Kent has trouble following Superman.
Yep.
That's what he always says. That was the line, wasn't it, in Superman 2, where actually no, it was in the Superman audition / test sequences that they shot for Superman 2. It wasn't actually in the final film, but he says, just no matter how hard he tries, he just never will be Superman in Lois's eyes. And I'm really going off on weird tangents in this episode, aren't I?
Yes.
This is a strange episode. Hopefully it's been enjoyable, at least, though.
Oh, it has been for me.
I'm glad you've enjoyed it. Hopefully that means at least someone in the audience will have. We'll see you next time. Goodbye.
Viacom.